Welcome back. I'm Delcy and I've really been excited to share with you about how to properly prepare for goats. Because truly, when you are prepared, you will be much more apt to enjoy the whole experience. And I really want you to enjoy raising goats. Have you been dreaming up where your fencing will go and how you'll build your goat sheds, and maybe you've even started calling around for hay and made sure that your local feed store has some goat mineral on order? It's exciting to think about. I'm excited for you just thinking about it. We are going to talk about general supplies in this lesson. I'm going to leave the most important one for last. It is so important, and I really want to talk about why it is so important. So let's get started. One important item that you will need for each of your goats is a collar. You want to make sure that it is correctly fitting, not too tight to suffocate them, and not too loose to catch on a fence and trap them that way as well. But collars are handy when you need to lead a goat somewhere. Many times goats will resist going where they don't want to go, and you end up pushing, pulling, dragging, carrying them to the location you want them that they don't want to go to. Or like yesterday when I was in the middle of feeding, all of my goats came pushing their way into the hay side right behind me at the barn, and they really didn't want to leave. Collars came in handy at that point. Leashes are a good idea as well. Depending on the size and strength of your goat, they will help you keep control of your goat. There is always a tipping point. You're dragging your goat until they decide they are really ready to go, and then they're dragging you. Leashes just help you maintain that control and contact with the goat. Brushing a goat will help keep their coat clean, shiny, and free from loose hair, and it will give you a bonding time with your goat. They will learn that it feels good and will happily burp and chew their cud and close their eyes contentedly if you brush them often. And depending on your goat breed, you may need clippers. Most of my goats haven't needed their hair clipped. They have shorter hair that doesn't get in the way of milking or make them too hot in the summer. But if you are showing your goats, you will need to clip them. One of my goats has really long leg hair. It's a long hair like around her udder that can get in the way of milking. And some breeds will need to be trimmed in really hot summer months to help just keep them cooler. So those are some instances where owning clippers for your goats would come in handy. You will also need to have hoof trimming supplies on hand. You will need hoof trimmers, and one of these hoof picks with a brush on the other end comes in handy as well. And a hoof plane will help flatten the edges and get off the rough spots. When you trim, you really need to be careful not to cut into the quick. Opening up the hoof until it bleeds can cause all sorts of problems like infection and tetanus. So be careful as you trim, and have some hoof and heel on hand to put on the wound if that actually does happen. But know that you will need to trim regularly. It is much easier to trim regularly than to have to go in and do a big corrective trimming. Also, when you're trimming, if you have tighter, close-fitting like gloves, it would be best to wear them. If your goat gives like a swift kick, those sharp hoof trimmers can have a high chance of cutting you or stabbing you. Ouch! Now we're going to talk about some really important items you really will need to think about and have on hand at all times. Wormer is one of those items. Worms and pneumonia are the leading causes of death in goats, and wormy goats are more susceptible to pneumonia. But they are finding that traditional wormers are losing their effectiveness and that worms are actually becoming resistant to wormers. Here are a few things you need to think about worms and your goats. Keep your goats healthy. The healthier they are, the more they are able to fight off a high worm load. Keep their mineral out and make sure they are getting enough copper. A goat ingesting sufficient amounts of copper will also be able to keep those worms in check as well. When you worm properly. Most wormers require a second dose at 10 days to get those worms that just recently hatched. And worm with the proper amounts of wormer. Not using enough will just make the worms more resistant. So just know that you will need to help your goats control worms in one way or another. And as I mentioned in a previous video, rotating pasture and using proper pasture management will also really help worms, keep those worms in check as well. But a wormy goat is a sick goat, and a sick goat will find even more ways to get sick. So this is a really important item to get figured out for your own herd. Another really important item you will need is an oral drenching gun. These come in so handy, and when your goat is dehydrated and sick, you will really wish you had one. A drenching gun like this will come in handy for so many reasons. They come in different sizes as well, and if you decide to give an herbal wormer, these come in handy to get your goat to take the wormer. They can also be used to rehydrate a goat with electrolytes, or if a goat has anemia, it can be used to give Rectal. Any oral medication can be given with a drenching gun like this, and is easier to use than a really big syringe because it fits so much easier into the back of their mouth. So get a drenching gun. There is a link below this video to give you an idea of pricing and what they look like. Here's the deal. You may have heard that sheep just die, right? They are very susceptible to sickness, and goats are a close relative to sheep, but are probably viewed as a little bit more hardy. The truth is, both sheep and goats are pretty strong, but seem to get sick fast. Why is that? They are strong enough to hide their symptoms and just push through not feeling well, and be tough enough until they just can't anymore. And by that time, they are pretty sick. And once they have reached that point, boy, you better act fast, because most likely they are on a quick downhill slope. One of the most common questions I get is, my goat is sick, what do I do? And one of the most important tools you will need handy at all times is a rectal thermometer. The first thing you will do when you are around your goats is to use your 5 senses always. When you go out to your animals, turn those senses on. Your 5 senses will tell you if your goats are acting off or odd or sick in any way. If you have noticed that a goat is standing off by itself, is not eating or drinking, maybe their poop looks a little bit abnormal, their tail is down, and they just have a depressed look, you will probably have a sick goat. What do you do next? You will take out that rectal thermometer and find out what their temperature is. And once you know their temperature, you will be able to determine how to treat them. In the last video in this series, we will talk about a medicine cabinet and what you will need on hand for treating your goats. And I'll tell you a story about what happened just recently, how I took my goat's temperature and immediately went into action to save her life. Just know that this will be a very important tool for you to have, because a goat's temperature will tell you so much of what is going on inside their body. A goat with a temperature is usually fighting an infection, and a goat with a low body temperature is probably dealing with some rumen-related issues, and low temperature can also be an indication that their whole body is shutting down, so quick action needs to take place. This video has got you covered from the goat's neck to its rear. Each item has its purpose and is equally important. You are one step closer to being prepared for your goats. Are you beginning to feel prepared? I hope so. If you have any questions, write them out below or send me an email at delcy@alifeofheritage.com. I'd be happy to help. As I'm transported back all those years ago, I can still remember the soft bleats of my 2 new milking goats, waking me as my husband and I curled up in our sleeping bags in a little campground in Washington. We were bringing back my first milking goats. We picked them up near a vet that was actually working on one of our horses and had to drive across half of Washington and half of Montana to bring both the horses and the goats home together. Poor Ruthie and Kira had probably never seen a horse before in their life, and I'm quite sure had never slept in a campground. I slowly warmed up to the idea of leaving our warm tent and getting ourselves together to head home. That delicious smell of moss and forest greeted my nose as I stepped out of the tent. I knelt down beside Ruthie to milk her in that campground. It was my second day of milking ever. I think we both were a bit nervous, and that was the start of my milking journey, and it's a special memory. I love going out to milk. It's usually a quiet time to relax, watch my goats and chickens, and just be. So tomorrow I'll show you what you will need to have for a successful milking journey as well. I'll see you then.